We are going to go back to this Yeats' poem later on, but this morning I'm going to do a different poet. He is an American poet, contemporary American poet. His name is John Ashbery. And actually, he is one of the best poets currently. We are going to read him today. He is a very good poet. He is good at creating a special kind of poetry. We call it ekphrastic, a poem about artwork. Right? It's kind of special kind of poem. We're going to read a poem by John Ashbery. It's called Illustration. Illustration. Right? The poem is about a nun, a young woman, nun. She is jumping to a death from a high-rise building. But it's a tragic scene, but it's very beautiful. It's like a picture, right? And we're going to read the poem first, and then we'll go to Yeats. We'll go back to Yeats' poem, Yeats' essay, Yeats and Renoir, and Impressionism. That's the essay we are going to read. Okay, first, John Ashbery. Page 58, 2058, illustration. A novice was sitting on a cornice high above the city. Angels combined their prayers with those of the police, begging her to come off it. What is happening? A novice was sitting on a cornice high above the city. He is on top of a building, right? Maybe she's going to jump. The people looking up at her, asking her, please come down, right? Angels, in line to angels, not people, angels. Angels combined their prayers with those of the police, begging her to come off it. Stanza 3, one lady promised to be her friend. One lady promised to be her friend. I do not want a friend, she said. Her mother offered her some garlands stripped off from her very legs. Mother offered her some garlands stripped from her very legs. Others brought little offerings of fruit and candy. The blind man, all his flowers. The blind man brought all his flowers. If any could be called successful, these were. For that, the scene should be a ceremony. For that the scene was a ceremony, was what she wanted. I desire a monument, she said. I want to move figuratively as waves crash the thoughtless shore. She said, I desire a monument. I want to move figuratively as waves crash the thoughtless shore. You people, I know, will offer me every good thing I do not want, but please remember, I died accepting them. With that, the wind unpinned her bulky robes, and naked as a rock's egg, she drifted softly downward out of the angel's tenderness and the mind of people. Section 2. Much that is beautiful must be discarded so that we may resemble a taller impression of ourselves. Moth climb in the flame. Alas, that wish only to be the flame. They do not lessen our stature. We twinkle under the weight of indiscretions. But how could we tell that of the truth we know? She was the somber vestment for that night, rocket side elegantly of the city, and there was feasting. There is so much in that moment, so many attitudes toward the flame. We might have soared from earth, watching her glide, aloft in a peplum of bright leaves. But she, of course, was only an effigy of indifference, a miracle not meant for us, as the leaves are not winter's, because it is the end. It's like a picture, right? Is it difficult? Not very difficult, right? Okay, stanza 1, section 1. A novice was sitting on a cornice. A novice, a student, right? A student nun was sitting on a cornice high above the city. So she's going to jump off the building, right? Angels combine their prayers with those of the police. Angels combine their prayers with those of the police. Those is what? Those mean players, right? The players of the police. Angels combine their prayers with the prayers of the police. Actually, the police are asking the woman to please come off, right? Begging her to come off it. One lady, so a lot of people are down there looking up at her, offering a lot of things, right? Many different things. A mother offered us some nylon stockings, right? Nylon, stripped from a very leg. Others brought little offerings of fruit and candy. Fruit and candy, right? The blind man offered what? All these flowers. It's interesting, blind man. Does the blind man need flowers? He can't see flowers, right? The blind man, all of his flowers. If anything could be successful, these were successful. For that, the scene should be a ceremony. That the scene should be a ceremony was what she wanted. All of this, what she wanted, right? What she wants is ceremony. Right? I desire monuments, she said. I want to move figuratively as waves crash the thoughtless shore. You people I know will offer me every good thing I do not want. But please remember, I died accepting them. Please remember me. Accepting them. Please remember, I died accepting them. With that word, the wind unpinned her bulky robes. Unpinned, verb, right? The unpin, unpin, right? She was swept away by the wind, right? The wind unpinned her bulky robes, and naked as a rock's egg, she drifted softly downward, out of angels' tenderness and out of the minds of man. Section 2. Much that is beautiful. A lot of things that are beautiful, much that is beautiful, must be discarded, so that we may resemble a taller impression of ourselves. So that we may resemble a taller impression of ourselves. Just like what, for example, butterflies, right? But moth climb in the flame. Alas, that wish to be the flame. A moth climb in the flame. Alas, which wish only to be the flame. They do not lessen our stature. We twinkle under the weight of the indiscretions. But how could we tell that of the truth we know? We know of the truth. How could we tell that we know of the truth, right? She was the somber vestment. For that night, the rocket sighed elegantly over the city, and there was feasting. There is so much in that moment, so many attitudes toward that flame. We might have soared from her, watching her glide aloft in a peplum of bright leaves. Peplum, what does it mean? Footnote 3. In an ancient Greece, a drapery above the upper part of the body. Okay, kind of dress, right? In a peplum of bright leaves. But she, of course, was only an effigy of indifference, a miracle not meant for us, as the leaves are not winter's because it is the end. The poem is very different from Yeats', right? Why don't we go back to the Yeats' poems? We're going to read the essay, right? Okay, we'll take a few minutes break. I'll get the handout, and then we'll continue, okay? If you go to page 243, you can have a look, right? Black and white photo, very beautiful, right? When you read the Lake Olive Innisfree, you rather imagine a place, not like the real Innisfree, no matter how beautifully it is photographed, right? Actually, a painting, a photograph is more beautiful than the real thing, right? And the next page, page 244. Samuel Palmer's gorgeous illustration for the Il Penseroso by John Milton, which appeared in the shorter poems of John Milton. The print is beautiful, right? And the Renoir painting, Maison Cornet, without date, oil on canvas, Musée des Beaux-Arts, Bordeaux. In this painting, as Yeats' Lake Isle, Renoir is highly sensitive to the light, very sensitive to the light, capturing the changing atmosphere, the first changing sky with clouds. Likewise, he is not attentive to depicting fields or trees or hills, but dance of light on them all. He is not interested in painting the real things, right? He's going to express himself by doing this kind of thing. And next page. Les Coulettes. This painting is an expression of his vision of nature. And the play 5, Renoir, probably the greatest painting by Renoir is Trois Baigneurs, Three Bathers. This is a very beautiful painting. Actually, you can't do this kind of painting, right? When you begin painting, you'll try to depict very realistically, right? You try to make bodies realistic, right? But this one is what? It's like a flower, right? Okay, let's go back to the beginning. Page 227. This study aims to trace what W.B. Yeats had been thinking about the art movement, Impressionism, and some Impressionists, and unravel how the two greatest masters of the last century, Yeats and Renoir, could work with almost the same goal in their respective art. In the discussion that follows, the following questions will be answered, such as, what was art for Yeats and for Renoir? What did each of the artists want to achieve in this world? What was the meaning of this world in relation to that world in the art? Despite the philosophical tinctures in these questions, I will not philosophize, because they were not philosophers, but artists who created poetical or artworks. Yeats had long written much prose on philosophical matter. However, he had done so not as philosopher, but as poet. And Renoir had avoided making theories, even calling himself an artisan, not a painter with a theory. All of you saw the movie, right? Renoir said, "I'm not an artist," right? "I'm not an artist," he said. Yet, both Yeats and Renoir created works of their highest perfection. With this in mind, this research attempts to look for the clues as possible answers to those questions in some of the particular works created in around 1899 by Yeats and by Renoir. The year 1899 is when Yeats disturbs his book of poetry, The Wind Among the Reeds, at the age of 34, and in 1899, Renoir was 58. In solving the questions, I would like to make an effort to understand how the two different artists, though they had lived the roughly contemporary age, worked toward same goal in art. This study is founded on an assumption that art and literature are closely related as sister arts. Fine art and poetry are called sister arts. Art and literature are both dependent and independent. That is, the mediums they use separate them, yet the matter in them merges them often. Hence, writers and artists flock together. Before I look into the particular works of both artists, I want to think about how the two different artists came to think and work on the same basis. The most important thing is that Yeats and Renoir lived the same age in the social milieu when Impression painting was in fashion in France and other parts of the world, as Yeats touched on the issue in his later life. Yeats was interested in the French literature and knew Mallarmé, the French poet, as he mentioned him often in his autobiography. And in Paris, Renoir, as a friend to Mallarmé, did in 1892 a portrait of Mallarmé, who then helped Renoir be commissioned to do a painting for the French government for the first time, which is Jeune Fille au Piano, young girls at the piano. Yeats must have known, or at least read Mallarmé. He mentions him in this section, The Trembling of the Veil, of his autobiography, in more than 5 places. In his preface to The Trembling of the Veil, written in Thorbalili, May 1922, Yeats says, Thorbalili is a very old tower made of stones, and Yeats lived there, and is a symbol of his artwork. He lived, it's a great tower, right? He called it Thorbalili. Yeats says, I have found in an old diary a saying from Stefan Mallarmé that his epoch was troubled by the trembling of the veil of the temple. As those words were still true during the years of my life described in this book, I have chosen The Trembling of the Veil for its title. I have read and taught Yeats for a long time and have seen much of Renoir, but strangely, Yeats had never mentioned Renoir, who seemed to have had temperament much similar to his. In its autobiography, Yeats seems to have a clear grasp of what Impressionism is. Yeats uses the idea of Impressionism in contrast to a study, making a difference between what the study is and what the mood is. In it, Yeats mentions Impressionism here and there to support his argument. The original mention of Impressionism appears in section 6, book 4, The Tragic Generation, in The Trembling of the Veil. The section begins with, all things apart from love and melancholy were a study to us. Home already learned in Botticelli, already learned in Botticelli, had began to boast that when he wrote of him, there would be no literature. All would be but learnings. Simon, when I first met him, studied music halls, as he might have studied the age of Chaucer, while I gave much time to what is called the Christian Kabbalah. Nor was there any branch of knowledge Johnson did not claim for his own. Yeats in it keeps telling us about encountering his learned friend, Gladstone, being one of them. He wants to say that the emotion is as important as intellect, questioning. Did he but wish to hide that he shared in their emotion? Oh, what are the winds and what are the waters? Mine are your eyes. Gladstone wanted us to believe that all things, his poetry with its Latin weight, his religion with its constant reference to the fathers of the church or to the philosopher of the church, almost his very courtesy were a study and achievement of the intellect. And then Yeats shows us Gladstone's angry reaction to Simon's poetry, which is wholly impressionistic. After Simon's poetry made him angry because it would substitute for that intellectual achievement, Parisian Impressionism, London fog, the blurred tawny lamplight, the red omnibus, the dreary rain, the depressing mud, the glaring gin shop, the stealthily shivering women. Three dexterous stanzas tell you that and nothing more. I, on the other hand, angered him by talking as if art existed for emotion only, and for refutation he would quote the close of the Achillean trilogy, the trial of Orestes on the Acropolis. Yet, at moments, the thought came to him that intellect, as he conceived it, was too much a thing of many books, that it lacked lively experience. Yet, he said to me, you need 10 years in a library, but I have need of 10 years in the wilderness. The second mention of the impression is made in section 9, the tragic generation. The section closes, though thee, malicious angel, the gracious muses turn to furies, O mine enemy. And all the things of beauty burn with flames of evil ecstasy. Because of thee, the land of dreams becomes a gathering place of fears, until tormented slumber seems one vehemence of useless tears. Here, Yeats seems to defend the strange souls born everywhere today with hearts that Christianity, shaped by history, cannot satisfy, and to further claim that religion can also bring round its antitheses. Our love letters wear out our love. No school of painting outlasts its founders. Every stroke of the brush exhausts the impulse. The pre-Raphaelitism had some 20 years, Impressionism 30 perhaps. Why should we believe that religion can never bring round this antithesis? It is true that our air is disturbed, as Mallarmé said, by the trembling of the veil of the temple, or that our whole age is seeking to bring forth the sacred book. Some of us thought that book near towards the end of the century, but the tide sank again. Yeats' Dramatis Personae has sections that discuss Impressionism style. In section 16, Yeats begins his essay recalling how his father painted. His idea of manner of paintings here seems to me the same as the style in prose and poetry. My father, Yeats' father, John Butler Yeats, began life as a pre-Raphaelite painter. When past 30 years, he fell under the influence of contemporary French painting, impression painting. Instead of finishing a picture 1 square inch at a time, he kept all fluid, every detail dependent upon every other, and remained a poor man to the end of his life. Because the more anxious he was to succeed, the more he did his pictures sink through innumerable sittings into the final confusion. Only when he was compelled to finish, and 8 or 9 sittings were his pictures, the work of a great painter. And then Yeats touches on his collaboration with Moore on some other place, saying that Moore's pursuit of style eventually made barren his later years. He would say to Moore, "Moore, if you ever get a style, it'll ruin you. It is colored glass, and you need a plate glass window." Certainly, Yeats is a superb stylist, but he's changed his style over time. He seemed to have a sense of direction style. Finally, when we went to Sweden to receive his Nobel Prize for Literature, he was asked because asked by someone to write an essay on Swedish Impressionism. As the Impression paintings were to be shown in London, Yeats thinks in section 2, the bounty of Sweden, that he has not necessarily knowledge to do so. But in fact, his knowledge of Impressionism is deep and full of insight. This is from Yeats' essay. "I know something of the French Impressionism that gave their painters their first impulse, but almost nothing of German or Austrian, and I have seen that of Sweden for the first time. At the first glance, Impressionism seems everywhere, the same with a different power, but not of sight or mind, and one has to live with it and make many comparisons, I think, to write more than a few sentences. But Impressionism's gift to the world was precisely that it gave at a moment when all seemed sunk in convention, a method as adaptable as that box of architectural Renaissance bricks. It has certainly taught us to see and feel, as everybody that wills can see and feel, all those things that are as wholesome as rain and sunlight, to take into our hearts with an almost mystical emotion, whatever happens without forethought or premeditation. It is not, I think, as accident that their art has coincided everywhere with a new sympathy for crowds, for the poor and the unfortunate. Certainly it arrived in these Scandinavian countries just at the moment when an intellectual awakening of the whole people was beginning. For I always read, or I'm told, that whatever I inquire about began with the 80s and was the outcome of some movement of that time. Then he compares Swedish Impressionist painters such as Eugene Janson with French such as Monet, with Irish such as his brother Jack. Yeats says, "When I try to define what separates Swedish Impressionism from French, I notice that the former has a stronger feeling for particular places. Monet will paint a group of trees by a pond in every possible light, changing his canvas every 20 minutes and only returning to a canvas when the next day's clock brings up the same light. But then it is precisely the light that interests him and interests the buyers of those almost scientific studies. Nobody will buy because it is a pond under his window, or that he passed in his boyhood on his way to school. I noticed in some houses where I launched two pictures of the Stockholm River, painted in different lights by Eugene Janson, and in the National Museum, yet another with a third effect of light. But much as the light pleased his imagination, one feels that he cared very, very much for the fact before him, but that he was able to forget for long that he painted a well-loved, familiar scene. I'm constantly reminded of my brother Jack, who continually paints from memory the people and houses of the village where he lived as a child. But the people of Roses will never care about these pictures. And these painters paint for an educated Stockholm. An English portrait painter is sometimes so preoccupied with light that one feels he would have had equal pleasure in painting a bottle and an apple. When Yeats wrote the last sentence, he might have thought of a still life by Cézanne. He has a firm, full grasp of the essential characteristics of the Impressionist painting of France and other countries. Earlier in section 1, in his Dramatis Personae, Yeats talks in passing about Monet that he had seen at Edward Martin's, including Degas, Corot, Ultamaro, and elsewhere in it, Monet, the caricaturist. But when he wrote The Bounty of Sweden, he had already had a lot of time to see and think much of Impressionism, but eventually develop and refine his taste and opinion of this art movement. But in fact, though Yeats never mentions Renoir, Cézanne, Van Gogh, or Picasso, all working around 1900 in it, Thomas Bodkin, who was Lane's closest Dublin friend, once heard Yeats expatiate on the merits of Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Matisse, a taste which can have a little support from Lane and was ridiculed by George Russell in the columns of the Irish Times. Section 3. As we have read what Yeats thinks about Impressionism as his style or sense of style has developed from Free Lafayette, like his father, to Impressionist later on, we can see Yeats change from a classicist to a modernist or revolutionary like Renoir. Both sound traditional in diction style. As in the last quote about his idea of Impressionism, his understanding of Impressionism is precise and insightful. To link Renoir and Yeats, let me look at Mallarmé first. It is interesting to see Yeats quote Mallarmé to argue for the cycle of all things, including religion, the changing influence of Christianity on the lives of artists. So, it is quite natural that Yeats sings of the heavenly place in history, as Renoir does of the southern villages of France. Their places turn into a heaven on earth. To familiarize us with Yeats' conception of religion, let us hear him explain. But what can the Christian confessor say to those who more and more must make all out of the privacy of their thought, calling up perpetual images of desire? For he cannot say, cease to be artist, cease to be poet, where the whole life is art and poetry, nor can he bid man leave the world, who suffer from the terrors that pass before shut eyes? Coleridge and Rossetti, though his dull brother did once persuade him that he was an agnostic, were devout Christians, and Steinbeck and Beardsley so towards their life's end, and Dawson and Johnson always, and yet I think it but deepened and multiplied temptation. Though the dark, malicious angel, the gracious muse is turned to furies, mine enemy, and all the things of beauty burned with flames of evil ecstasy. Because of thee, the land of dreams becomes the gathering place of fears, till tormented slumber seems one vehement of useless tears. Why are these things, these strange souls born everywhere today with hearts that Christianity, as shaped by history, cannot satisfy? Our love letters wear out love, no school of painting outlasts its founders, etc. At this moment, I would be anxious to know if Renoir had actually discussed religion with Mallarmé, but there was such a possibility. Renoir did a portrait of Mallarmé in 1892 and remained friendly with him until he attended Mallarmé's funeral on September 11, 1898. Mallarmé was thus a mutual friend of Renoir and Yeats, though Yeats had never met Mallarmé or Renoir, and though Renoir had never met Yeats. However, it is possible that Yeats must have seen Renoir's work somewhere in Dublin or London or Paris. We may need further research to prove Yeats had seen Renoir in person, but in 1905, from January to February, about 60 Renoirs were exhibited, along with other Impression painters, at an exhibition of Impression paintings in London. From January to February 1905, Yeats' friend and love, Maud Gonne was thinking of divorcing MacBride, who had attacked Maud when drunk and who had assaulted her half-sister, Eileen, one winter night in 1904. In November 1904, Yeats shows John Bull's Other Island, produced at the Royal Court in London. Maud Gonne, who lived in Paris, according to Cardozo, went to London to see Yeats for comfort and health in the following year. In view of this circumstance, Yeats must have been in London often, but it is not clear whether he saw the Impressionist exhibition held in London from January to February 1905. It is highly likely that Yeats saw Impressionist painters, including Renoir, while he had been in Paris. February 1894, April to May 1898, December 1902, April 1911, January 1912, to south of France from January to March 1938, and finally died on January 28, 1938 at Roquebrune, France. Section 4. Renoir's depiction of ordinary people and landscapes and the seascape is more than what they are in the real world. It is an idealized world, but it is different from Romanticism. Yeats is a romantic in his bones, favoring the mysterious and religious, but his sense of style and substance deeply rooted in the life of ordinary people as well as noble people. Now, look at the heavenly vision that is realized in the works of both artists, whose sense of style is rooted in this world. First, in Yeats' poetry, as Green has fully explored in the demonstrative pronouns, this and that, and the adverbs of place, here and there, in the chapter, this and that, here and there. Yeats seems to have been deeply concerned with the fundamental questions. What is man? And where is he located? Here in this world and there in that world? Similarly, as a sincere and serious artist, Renoir was also asking the same question in the course of his life. To create art, both for the poet and the painter, was to search for the answer to these questions. Yeats had incessantly been making sincere and all-out effort to create a heavenly world in perfect form of art. He had never left the poem alone, even a finished one, even after its publication. Thus, we have a quick book of poetry with plenty of footnotes on each page, the volume edition. Yeats was a romantic with a sense of classical form. He was a romantic in heart, a classicist in head. Yeats is regarded as the greatest poet of the last century because he was the first poet that could build up a huge body of poetry with a new poetic practice on the fountain of romantic poets. He transcended the romantics and created new poetry, proclaiming the beginning of new poetics. Yeats brought out the most important book of poetry in his early part of life, The Wind Among the Reeds, published in 1899 at the age of 34. In the process of becoming an ever-changing stylist, Yeats' understanding of Impressionism has deepened, as you have seen in the preceding sections above. Prior to this, Yeats had published The Rose, 1893. I will take from this book one of the most poems, The Lake Isle of Innisfree, so as to compare him with Renoir and his work. Meanwhile, 1899, Renoir was 58. Renoir had already become famous, being the first financially successful Impressionist artist in Paris. As fully analyzed by Sylvie Patry, curator of the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, in her essay, Renoir, Revolutionary and Classical. Renoir was a classicist and revolutionary in that he had created new painting. Section 5. Now let me compare Yeats and Renoir. How they saw the landscapes and turned them into works. First, we look at Yeats. David Pearce has deep insights into the nature of Yeats' visual sensitivity and explains well how it translates into poetry. Pearce's characterizing of Yeats' changes in perception of natural scenes of island is logical and makes sense, in general, except for a few things that are different from mine. What I have in mind is the broader milieu of the world at that time, which was the art movement, French Impressionism, that had a widespread influence on the rest of the world. Why and how it had originated is a big issue, which will need much work from the perspective of the world politics and economy, as well as the fast developing social and scientific changes of the world at the time. However, Yeats, as well as his father John and his brother Jack, both being Impressionist painters in some sense, must have been under the sway of the Hughes movement. Pierce offers 4 different attitudes toward nature in Yeats' poetry. Yeats' nature has a symbolic function of natural scene. He has a sense of longing, a recognition that there is more to landscape than realistic depiction. Yeats' dreaming of nature is rooted in identifiable physical worlds. Yeats sees nature as a means of invention. One of the poems Yeats wrote, which exemplifies these attitudes, is Lake Isle of Innisfree. It was written in 1890 in Bedford Park, London. Yeats' novel, John Sherman, has a passage that well describes Yeats' feelings in the poem. Last week we read the poem, Lake Isle of Innisfree, and this is the background. This is the background, okay. He heard the faint trickling of water nearby. It came from a shop window where a little water jet balanced a wooden bowl upon his point. The sound suggested the cataract with a long Gaelic name that leapt crying into the gate of the winds at below. He was sat dreaming a whole day by walking down once in the morning to the borders of the Thames, a few hundred yards from his house, looking at the azure-covered YJK. It made him remember an old daydream of his. Okay, I'll skip. Next paragraph. Compared with this, the poem Lake Isle of Innisfree, the Lake Isle of Innisfree is as follows. Okay, I'll skip. The Isle, Innisfree, is one of 28 islands in Loughill, which is an enchanted landscape, an off-tree paradise which accompanied the lake nurtured Yeats into his adult years. I'm certain that the water of the sea, and of the lakes, and of mist and rain, has all but made the Irish Image. Yeats longs for the island he used to see when growing in Sligo. The poem is a result of his longing for a place, a heavenly place he has nurtured. It has originated from a real island, It is a thing he has invented here in London, which is more than the real island. When you read the poem, you will rather imagine the place, not like the real Innisfree, no matter how beautifully it is photographed. The real Innisfree is never satisfied to a romantic imagining of the island. The 2 lines from stanza 2, that midnight solar glimmer, noon of purple glow, an evening full of linnet's wings, reminds me of the Samuel Palmer's gorgeous illustration. Okay, I'll go to the next page. Now, we will look at 3 Renoirs. One painted around 1898 and another around 1908, and third painting in 1917 to 1919. Renoir was 58 in 1898 when he began going down to south of France to have his rheumatism treatment. While on a trip, he seems to have painted a Maison à Garnier. After Renoir settled from 1898 to 1906 in Les Coulettes, Cannes-sur-Mer, southern France, he did landscape scenes from his garden. His garden scenes, old farmhouses in Les Coulettes. Apart from such paintings, this painting is a view of the whole village, which he must have done while Renoir was still able to take a walk alone. In this painting, as in Yeats' The Lake Isle, Renoir is highly sensitive to the light, capturing the changing atmosphere, the fast-changing sky with clouds. Likewise, he's not attentive to depicting the field or trees or hills, but the dance of light on them all. Another painting, Les Coulettes, is an expression of his vision of nature. Most of the landscape paintings Renoir did were done in Cannes-sur-Mer when Renoir was wheelchair-bound because of his severe rheumatism. In the movie, Renoir, he can't work, right? He can't work. Though he suffered physically from the pain, his painting never shows it. Renoir built a modern residence in Le Colette, but he never painted it, and instead painted old farmhouses with olive trees, the panoramas of the hills and the village. It is like the world of industry Yeats has imagined created in his poem, The Lake Isle. This painting has another striking similarity to Yeats' poetry. It is both classical and impressionistic. The eye moves from the foreground to the background, which is a traditional composition, yet the execution of the brush is characteristic of Renoir, the impressionist. The farmers look angelic, never showing the burden of work, as Renoir never depicts his pain in his painting. Yeats and Renoir have another motif they had worked on throughout their life, women. Yeats' women are real women like Renoir's, but in Yeats' poetry, they hardly represent and remain the real. They change into a symbolic or mythic dimension, as in the landscape in his poetry. Renoir's lush nudes in nature, merged with nature. Probably the greatest painting by Renoir is Trois Baigneurs, Three Bathers. Renoir did this painting just before his death in 1919. The women are one with nature, the women are part of nature, as flowers are. He expresses a unity of being, to borrow from Yeats. Man being one with nature, man being one with the soul, man being one with the woman in soul and body. Renoir's son, John, talks about his father. Every stroke of his brush is full of the pleasure of his finding a new world. The roses my father paints make modern man awake. In him, the central balance of all things now beginning falling apart in the universe. As discussed above, Yeats and Renoir began as classicists. Yeats' ideas of poetry is like his idea of art. He began as pre-Raphaelite, turned into impressionist modernist. However, he remained a romantic until the end of his career, as Renoir did. It is possible that Yeats saw Renoir in Dublin, London, and Paris. In 1905, from January to February, 60 Renoirs were shown at the exhibition of Impression painting, where was Yeats at this time, because he was in and out of London and Paris at around that time, 1904 to 1905. He mentioned Manet and Monet in his early life. He is said to have expatiated on the merits of Cézanne, Gauguin, Van Gogh, and Matisse, and at the time of receiving his Nobel Prize in Stockholm, London, his discussion and impression is full of insight into the art movement, and Monet in particular. This study focused on the similar temperament in Yeats and Renoir in terms of practice of making art, the landscapes and women. The central theme is that of the paradise, or this world idealized. The early poem, The Lake Isle of Industry, is the manifestation of Yeats' poetics of landscape, both the poetics of middle, and last poetry. Likewise, Renoir insists on the perfection of form in art. He calls himself an artisan. In southern France, landscape he paints are idealized, just as his women and flowers are. Renoir, visiting Italy, marvels at the fresco painting by Raphael, whereas Yeats aims at returning to the art practice of Raphael, whose painting his students imitate in inferior fashion. Both Yeats and Renoir are classical and impressionistic. Their works reflect the heavenly vision of the world in art, which is both traditional and modern. Okay? Thank you.